announcement. And then today, the President of the United States coming out in support of my ethics bill, which takes us to the legislation because both the ethics bill and my term limits bill match precisely the policy guidelines that the President set out. So I look forward to working with him and with Leader Schumer to find the best way to advance both of those bills. Leader Schumer has given me as solid a commitment to take up the ethics bill as a leader can, with limited time in front of him and multiple competing priorities. But I think the President's announcement probably makes that even more likely. So that was a happy situation. Switching to the investigative side, both the Judiciary and the Finance Committees have been investigating misconduct at the Supreme Court. The upshot of that was a letter that Chairman Wyden of the Finance Committee and I sent to the Attorney General asking him to pick up where Justice Thomas's lawyers refused to answer further questions about what happened to the loan for the motor coach, $267,000. Apparently no principal ever paid. Interest stopped being paid. Pretty straightforward law that that's an incidence of income which would require to be reported both on judicial disclosure forms and on federal tax forms, and it's not clear he did either. So that merits further investigation because we're being stonewalled. So the investigative work is continuing, and we continue to dig, and we continue to dig up more and more derogatory information. The last thing I'll mention is that I've worked with the Judicial Conference, which is the organization that runs the judicial branch. They've given me 2 significant wins already on questions that I brought before them. One was ending the Scalia trick of pretending that a personal invitation from a resort owner who you don't actually know amounts to personal hospitality under the disclosure rules. And the second was requiring better disclosure by the front groups that come in as amici curiae and are the intermediaries between the billionaires who put these justices on the court and the justices themselves. They get their operating orders through these little flotillas of amici, and now they're going to have to do a lot more disclosing. So it's in the context of all of that, in which we are making progress in all of those areas, steady and consistent progress, that the President's announcement is so welcome, and I'm happy to take your questions.
How closely
Steve.
does your legislation track what the President's introducing?
Precisely.
Precisely.
Is there any realistic?
No, I take that back. He hasn't introduced anything. He's made a policy statement of what he wants to be in the bills, and we are aligned, and I spoke to his legal counsel, Whitehouse counsel, Ed Siskel, and asked if there's any airspace between us, and he said, well, we're not endorsing any bills yet, but no, there's no airspace.
Is there any realistic hope that these types of proposals will become law with as long as there's a divided Congress?
I think, well, let's say, the way I see it is that the same creepy billionaires who are behind the effort to put these justices on the court are also funding the dark money political operation of the Republican Party. So the Republican Party is never going to allow proper investigation into the Supreme Court if it can help it. If we win the House, then they can go forward, and senators can't filibuster a House subpoena, and even President Trump can't block a House subpoena. So the most immediate available angle for a very thorough and rigorous investigation is a post-November Democratic House of Representatives.
To follow up on that, we see how conservatives and Republicans have transformed the Supreme Court to the point where it now has a conservative majority. Do Democrats like you and your colleagues bear responsibility for getting outplayed politically and strategically?
Yes.
Would you elaborate on that?
Well, as one of the people who made most of the warnings early on, I feel vindicated in a terrible way, and I wish we weren't in the situation that we are in. But clearly, for a long time, the Republican Party has enjoyed a voting base that objected to Roe versus Wade, Brown versus Board of Education, Miranda v. Arizona, you name it. And so at the voter level on the Republican side, there was grave concern about the court for a long time. You can remember impeach Earl Warren bumper stickers from the old days. And then recently, when the creepy right-wing billionaires ran out of things to try to do to get their agenda accomplished through democracy, they settled on capturing the court as the way to re-engineer American society through the back door of the Supreme Court. And that combination made court capture an extremely attractive thing for the Republicans, and I would have to concede the Democrats napped through a lot of that.
Why is that? Why were Democrats not more effective in parrying that or responding?
Hard to say, but I think partly it's, you know, we tend to be institutionalists, and people who are very touchy about critiquing the court as an institution, particularly as a captured or corrupted institution. It took a lot of evidence to get people over that hump.
In your view, Senator, and in short strokes, please, would you say why it is you feel the court is in need of reform?
The court is in need of reform because it is no longer implementing the law fairly, is no longer reading the Constitution honestly. It is instead doing the bidding of a small group of right-wing billionaires and their whole array of front groups that have spent over a decade working on capturing the court and turning it into a tool of the far right.
Senator Whitehouse,
Yeah.
you and I have spoken before about the morass, the swamp, if you will, of book deals. Do any of these new disclosure rules attack that at all?
No.
Or force any sort of preemptive notion about book deals?
No, as long as there's, you know, proper disclosure and the book deals are on the up and up, that's just part of the program. Now, if Leonard Leo is buying 10,000 copies of Justice Thomas's book so that he can run up sales and create revenue for Justice Thomas, then that's the kind of thing that should be investigated. But in the ordinary course, no, justices under my legislation can continue to write books.
And then in the mechanics of the recusal process, do you suspect that should begin at the beginning of the hearing before testimony is heard before the Supreme Court? How does that work from your perspective as a former Attorney General prosecutor?
I think that in the best case scenario, the court polices itself, and the Chief Justice, who has administrative responsibilities over the court and is the Chief Justice, should use his power to go to the justices like Alito and Thomas and say, look, this is a pretty straightforward violation of the recusal laws. You need to take the appropriate steps. And if not, you know, I may actually say something publicly about it and bring a little pressure to bear. Instead, there's omerta at the court. So that would be the easiest way. The less easy way is to set up a group of other judges to whom a complaint can be made when it appears that recusal is warranted because of conflict of interest, so that you at least get a hearing. You're going to make your case to somebody, and that's what our ethics bill creates. A proposal for fact-finding and a proposal for determination.
One quick question. Your political opposition has already moved this into the field of politics. They're claiming that they want to have the same desire for term limits for, you know, House membership, senators.
I have a term limit, 6 years.
I was going to say, if you could elaborate on that, please.
I think it's very different when somebody goes before the voters and has a 2-year term in the case of the House, or a 6-year term in the case of a senator, or a 4-year term in the case of Rhode Island's governor, than somebody who is there essentially eternally, and particularly when they're gaming the system so that they're strategically resigning to force the court into one partisan cubbyhole.
The president's op-ed this morning seems to foreclose the possibility of packing the court, talking about 2 18-year terms and 2 years picking a new justice, right? So it would, expanding the court seems to be off the table. Is that your opinion as well?
The way the bill works is that it would gradually expand the court because the 18-year terms are retroactive.
Okay.
So in the same way that Rhode Island's senior judge, Will Smith, on the district court, or Rhode Island's senior judge Rosary Thompson on the First Circuit Court of Appeals, they went on to senior status. They stayed on the court. So the senior justices would go on to senior status if they'd served 18 years, and then they would basically await the arrival of an original jurisdiction case, and they would handle the original jurisdiction cases, and the appellate work, which is conferred by the Constitution upon Congress to control, would be handled by the new replacements who filled in when they went on senior status. It's very similar to what happens on district courts and circuit courts of appeal right now.
Do you see any merit in the talk of expansion of the court in terms of adding justices to seats?
Beyond the way that we do it
Beyond
under the
the-
term limits, I'm much more comfortable with the term limits.
And do you have an opinion
Proposal.
on the AOC articles of impeachment that she's
I don't.
introducing? Okay.
I don't. Obviously, they're going absolutely no place in her house with Speaker Johnson, so
Yeah, I was
it's
wondering.
kind of it's a moot point.
But that does tag into like next session maybe, if you talk
I
about.
think it's an indication that if the House is retaken by Democrats, that a sincere and serious investigation will take place that will get to the bottom of what has gone on over there, how the court was captured, by whom, what all the telltales are, what the evidence is, and I think it could be an investigation along the lines of and at the scale of the January 6th Commission.
Senator, with Kamala Harris now the apparent Democratic nominee, do you believe that her campaign is going to be able to scale up sufficiently in the short time to November to be as competitive as she needs to be?
I do. Remember, she inherits the Biden-Harris campaign that was already underway. And while, in order to reflect her own views and her own personality and her own political persona, there may be some changes that take place of personnel, of tone, and perhaps even of policy. By and large, she stepped into a running train and has all of the weight and force of that entire operation, now buoyed by this recent surge in interest and excitement.
But the Biden campaign was organized around much fewer live events, much fewer interviews, and
Yeah, she's going to run things differently, but the campaign apparatus, the bulk of it, is there, is in place. She's not building from scratch. She's making amendments, I would say, to a full-blown campaign operation.
With
Senator
regard to
Whitehouse,
Vice
do you
President
expect
Harris,
that the, go ahead.
with regard to Vice President Harris, your ear is to the ground. What do you, are you hearing unanimity among Democrats have her as their?
I think so. I think so. I haven't heard a contrary voice. There may be some out there, but I have not heard them. And by the way, she put out a statement this morning aligning herself with President Biden's statement and thus aligning herself with my bills.
Senator, do you expect any of the, if you will, predicted opposition from the uncommitted movement with the vice president now as a candidate? It was clear that the Democratic National Convention was going to be sort of a staging ground for folks opposed to American foreign policy interventions. Do you sense any of that, or has there been a coming together?
I sense a coming together, and we'll see when we turn up in Chicago in August how it all plays out. But I think there's been very considerable growth in morale and excitement, in volunteers, in fundraising, and in unity.
What's going to happen with the immigration issues? Vice President Harris, she doesn't like the Latino community that much because she didn't engage Latino media. And President Obama was the deportator-in-chief, and she's the immigration czar. What's going to happen with the minority community and Latinos and immigrants?
I will let her and her campaign speak to how they're going to approach immigration. But I would say that we have repeatedly tried in the Senate, including when she was in the Senate, to pass bipartisan immigration reforms that Democrats and Republicans alike could agree to. And over again, they have been shot down by Republicans, most recently by Trump, telling all of his people to walk away from the deal that was negotiated. Previous to that, the bill that came out of the Judiciary Committee was killed in the House without even a hearing by the Republican Speaker. So I think what she sees is the need for a serious, significant, bipartisan reform that is fair to immigrants who are in this country and that keeps our border safe. Simple as that. Thanks, everybody. Got a plane to catch. Really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you for coming out.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator.
Don't forget your bag.
Security. Did I set it down here? Yes, I did. Thank
There you go.
Steve.
I spent the week,
Capable of forgetting it.
spent the weekend in your city.
You did. Did you
Important
enjoy
folks
it?